In this episode, we've got Jeremy Wyatt on the show. He is an executive recruiter in the data space. He's got so much knowledge on what works and what doesn't around data person hiring, both at the individual contributor level and at the executive level. We dive into a lot of interesting topics. So enjoy this episode of the Delivery Layer podcast, and thanks for tuning in. All right, Jeremy, welcome to the Delivery Layer podcast. Excited to have you.
Solomon, I'm excited too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's we've been connected on LinkedIn for a while, and you've always had such smart things to say about data leadership, data careers, the data hiring market, organizations, and so I'm excited to dig into all of that during this episode. Maybe you could just for the people that aren't familiar with you, can you give a little bit of background on yourself and what you do and how you got into it?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that introduction. I hope I can live up verbally to what you've said that I put out in print. Yeah, my name's Jeremy. I run a data and analytics recruiting firm called Wyatt Partners. At a high level, we hire data leaders and chief data officers, and then we build out teams for those chief data officers and data leaders. Been doing that for probably about 15 years now. So I'd like to consider myself an expert in that space. Have seen a lot of change over that period in terms of technologies being used and the applications for business, I guess, but mostly the challenges in terms of hiring are still exactly the same, and often most of the mistakes that sort of made are exactly the same as well. We've been responsible for a lot of sort of high-profile chief data officers, but over the years, thousands of individual contributor roles within those data organizations as well.
That's really, really great. I'm so excited to have this conversation because one of the interesting things about having been also in the industry for a while is, on the one hand, things have changed substantially. We've grown so much. I mean, thinking back 15 years ago, data and analytics hiring, I imagine, looked far different than it does today. But at the same time, it seems like there are some universal things, as you said, that some of the problems that we have today aren't actually any different than the problems that we had before. So talk through some of those problems a little bit. Like, you've seen a lot. So what are some things that companies get wrong when they try to go out and build data teams, and how have you seen that change over the years?
Well, they get everything wrong. they get everything wrong a lot of the time. So that's a difficult question to answer. Has that changed over time? It has, I think, actually changed over time because the technology around recruitment has changed, and LinkedIn's been has made such a kind of profound impact on the hiring world, and maybe that's something we'll get into later. But let me sort of unpack the question because I answered it rather flippantly in terms of everything wrong. But let me give you a typical scenario. Business wants to become more data driven, and they think, well, okay, so we want our leaders and people within our business to take data-driven decisions. Right, we need to hire someone to set that up. So they go to market to hire a data leader, but because they don't really know what they're looking for, often what they end up doing is they want that person to be all things to all men, and you see this on job adverts and when I have conversations with businesses, because really in that scenario what they need is someone to set up business intelligence for the folks within that business, and provide good data management, good data quality, basically so they can get good insights to take decisions. And but what you end up seeing is a sort of a wish list of that, plus maybe someone who knows a little bit about setting up machine learning solutions, someone who knows a little bit about large language models and generative AI, someone who's an expert in the business that they work for particularly as well. So you get this whole sort of mishmash of a spec, if you like, that they go to market with, which is massively confusing for anyone that might look at that. Typically, they then stick out a job advert, which is their main strategy to hire someone. Job adverts, as we know, only get seen by probably about 3-4% of the talent pool anyway. So they end up hiring someone who's completely not fit for purpose because their sort of direction was never in place in the first place. And that's not necessarily the individual's fault either. That person then might, over a period of 6 to 12 months, start hiring team members, perhaps some data engineers, perhaps some analysts, so they might make 5 or 6 hires. Suddenly you're in a situation where that hasn't worked. And you're in a situation where, maybe they're sort of, 7 figures in the hole, $1 million, $2 million down in terms of, the FD's budget, and it hasn't worked. And those people end up leaving. The company's then sort of back to square one in terms of its data analytics initiatives, is no further in terms of its thinking about how to succeed, and often then waits a couple of quarters until a new budget is released, or perhaps a new CTO comes in or something like that to sort of restart that process again. So that's a typical scenario that I see. So you could pick out any number of things from that often played out scenario of what they get wrong.
That's so interesting. All right, so I'm gonna pick out 2 in particular. One, I think it just reflects the fact that leadership hiring is so tricky and high stakes, because who you hire and what you hire them for, it's not just them, it's the team that they're going to build. And if you go in the wrong direction with a leader, it magnifies the disruption. It's not one bad hire, it's a team of bad hires doing the wrong thing in your organization, which is just important, I think, for everybody to understand and keep in mind. The second piece there, I want to dig in a little bit more, because making an analogy, for example, to sales, right? If you were in recruiting and giving an example for what a company should be looking for as a CRO or a VP of sales, it would look like the laundry list of everything that makes them perfect for your organization. That's kind of the typical advice, right? You want someone who is used to your industry and understands your industry, and then you want someone who understands your type of product, right? Is it product-led growth, or is it enterprise sales, or whatever it is? And then you want someone who understands your stage of company, and there's a bunch of boxes of lists that people are expected to check for those types of roles. And what it seems like for you is that when companies are doing the same thing for data leaders, they're putting out this big list of things to check, and they're, I guess, finding people, or maybe not finding people who check those boxes, but then it's a mistake for reasons that aren't on their checklist. Is that what you're saying? Or are the reasons that people are failing on the checklist, they just are not finding people, so they're settling without checking all the boxes?
So what I think it is, I just don't think there's enough. They're not focused enough in what the actual mission is. What do they deem as success? So often a good way of playing this backwards for a company in that scenario is kind of thinking, well, if this person is in role 12 months, 18 months down the line, and they've done a tremendous job, what does that look like? Let's really focus on that. What does that look and feel like? How will the organization have changed? What will be happening? What will that mean then for our business? So extrapolate it out. Actually, what will that mean for our business? And so if you have that kind of focus of really clarity on what success looks like, then it's much easier then to go, okay, well, fine. Who do we need? Like, what does that person look like that can achieve that for us?
Yeah.
And often when you do that, it becomes very focused on what that person does look like who can achieve that for you, and you won't have this whole plethora of wish lists. And actually, if you go through that exercise as well, you get another great benefit from that, which is that you're often able to communicate to a potential candidate why they should be interested in the role. You're able to tell a story in a much better way to candidates, because you can actually then say, look, this is what success looks like, and this is what it means for the business. This is actually what will be happening. And 99% of the time, people can't do that. So that's a great exercise to go through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's less that the data leaders have anything that they're doing wrong. It's more that nobody knew what they were supposed to do in the first place from a company perspective. And so as the company either A, hires the wrong person, or B, even if that person could have done the job right, if the company doesn't even know what they want effectively, then how would they ever get there? Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, it's going to be one of two things, because it's either one, the company wants to become more data driven. We want to start taking more data driven decisions, and that's quite a general thing. But that can be okay. You then need to extrapolate out, okay, well, what does that mean if we are able to start taking more data-driven decisions? Specifically, how is that going to affect certain functions within the business? You know, what is CMO, for example, then going to be able to start taking decisions about in a more clear way, or what are the challenges that they're facing that could help with, and then play that out. So there's that, which is more general. If you're a business that has a really specific use case, and that's why you're what you're hiring for, that's fine. That's probably going to bring more clarity right from the get-go. But then just focus on that. Fine. Let's solve that. What does that look like in 12 months when when we've overcome that challenge? How do we get there? Either way, you're actually just drilling down and getting some real focus in terms of then who is that person? What does that person look like who can achieve that for us? I think the mistake is often, well, after we've done that, we then we then like to start we'd like to start doing machine learning or data science or more predictive analytics. Let's call it that, or then we'd start doing generative AI stuff, because that's the cool thing now. Okay, and that's fine, but I think what companies have to understand is that probably the data leader they need to hire now is not that data leader. There's 2 or 3 iterations of a data leader there. And actually the person they need to hire now, just focus on that mission. That initial mission that you had in mind, what success looks like. Don't worry about the second iteration or the third iteration. Focus on that and then go to the hiring market with some clarity.
Okay. That's really interesting. On the other side, on the data leader side, you've obviously hired and been a part of the hiring process for many senior data leaders and CTO or CDOs and maybe some CTOs, who knows. What are some of the core characteristics that you've seen in the data leaders that have success at that top level versus the ones that are successful at sort of the level below, but find it tough to really succeed in the top job?
I think it really depends. I guess it depends what you mean by the top job. I mean, if the top job, are you defining the top job as CDO in a corporate enterprise business, and that job sits at exec board level?
Great question. Let's say yes on that one. Yes, chief data officer sitting on the executive leadership team of a business.
Yeah, well, I think that for that top job, that's such a different skill set to a chief data officer or data leader within an SME. They're such different roles. Obviously, within a sort of enterprise level corporate to sit at that exec level, as a CDO, and there aren't too many that do, but to sit there, you've got to have the skills of a exec board member. Within a corporate organization, be that CDO or the COO or COO, CFO, and those skill sets are, they're very nuanced commercial skill sets. They're highly skilled commercial operators, CDO or not, to live in that world, you're probably someone who's often come up through a corporate route and knows how to play that game. in all honesty. So the skill set for that is going to be very different from, as I say, a data leader at an SME or a funded tech growth business. What was it? Go back to the question again.
No, that was the perfect answer to the question.
Because we were sort of defining.
So we were defining the different levels. Yeah. I could not agree with you more on what it takes to be a CDO at a big company. You need to be an executive. You can't just be a data person. And I found many people who become senior in sort of technical data roles really struggle to bridge the gap to the sort of general executive roles for the reason that they haven't come up through more of that commercial team background and don't have that experience. I've seen a bunch of people struggle with that. So that's really interesting context. What about in more of a small, medium-sized business or a tech growth startup for a data leader? What do you see are the key characteristics that are driving success in those roles?
There are some similar ones, but typically you're probably going to have someone who's more technical or who's closer in terms of years to have been hands-on. If you've got a CDO in a enterprise level business at exec board level, ultimately they're going to be a leader first, a commercial leader who's managing change, transformation, strategic planning, that kind of thing. Within a smaller business, SME or startup, they're going to be far closer to the technical infrastructure, if you like, at that level. I think also at that level, I think one of the so we're talking about the startup and SME level now. I think for me, one of the there's two key things. It's like it's a deep technical understanding combined with an understanding of the business and the business model. I think one of the things I see a lot, and this is a real separate thing that separates, I think, the really successful people, is that they've got a deep understanding of the business. And what I mean, that sounds like a really throwaway comment, but what I mean when they've got a deep understanding of the business, they get how the business makes money.
Yeah.
That probably sounds really silly, but the amount of people I'd speak to who are in quite senior positions who don't actually understand how the business makes money or how the business is providing value. And, it's kind of like and if you look behind that, what are the levers that allow the business to make money? It's really taking a kind of really deep-seated interest in the business and how it operates, because I think from a data and analytics perspective, if you understand that, you can provide 10x the value, because you're not just focusing on a data operation or a data science operation. You're actually focusing on it in the context of how that business can be much more successful. And I think also it'll allow you to build much better relationships internally as well. If you've got an operational leader, what's he focused on? What's he interested in? He's interested in operational efficiency, because actually if we can reduce our operational efficiency by 2% in this area, that's an extra 20 million in terms of profit for the business, for example. And it's kind of understanding those levers. I think within the business is a massive differentiator.
That's super interesting. How have you seen the market change over time when it comes to that type of business connection? And because I think back to I started growing what you would consider now to be sort of like a modern technical data team, 10 or 11 years ago at a startup, right after the HBR article came out. I sort of fell into data and started building a team. And when I think back to the people that I hired way back then, they all came from business backgrounds where they were doing some technical stuff. It was sort of the people that wanted to jump into data from business or had done a lot of things, but there was nobody that had ever trained to be a data person. Whereas now I find that there's a majority of the people that are trying to break into data have specifically planned and trained to have data careers.
Yeah.
How do you think that's changed things?
Well, I think there's probably two kind of there's two things there. I mean, one, in the last sort of 10, 20 years, data has gone from a sort of dark basement, back office room, full of nerds to or perceived nerds through to something now that's, often quite core to the business, and that's changed rapidly. And I think so. In one sense, that's changed rapidly, but in another sense, it's quite interesting what you were saying about. So you weren't hiring data people; you were hiring business people that had some data.
I mean, I was hiring data people, but back then it wasn't like someone trained in school and were trying to get into data analyst jobs right after it. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
some people
that's
did,
true.
but most of the people that I hired, they were in, call it technical, like I think back, assorted analyst type of jobs, but that was sort of what they ended up doing versus what they planned to do.
Yeah, and did you think that? Did you find that a healthy way to hire?
Yes, very much so, because they came with some real business chops. And I think back to that original team. I mean, everybody is doing pretty well. Like one person, she has led engineering at a bunch of startups. She leaned more into the engineering side. Someone, one of the other team members there, relatively senior at Google, someone else senior in a financial company, and someone else, she's leading a big team at Comcast. So it's like that like good core business knowledge really served the team well when I was there, and as all of us have gone on to further adventures.
Yeah, well, this kind of speaks to like an interesting dichotomy, I think, in the data world, which is kind of, to be a really good data person, you almost don't want to be a data person, if that makes sense at all. And I think one of the going back to the article, the 2011 data science article, which I think you referred to,
Yeah.
which and I think that spoke about, there was at that period there was a sort of shortage of, data analysts, data science talent, and there was a lot of money thrown at courses and educating people. And I think so, therefore, this kind of what's become known as this data community, sprung up. And there's been, that's a double-edged sword, because I think it's great for sort of data people to have a tribe and, be able to share frustrations with like-minded people. But also, I think what it's created is people who are just data people. Back to your point as well, and they see themselves as data people. And the sort of the paradox of it is to be, and to your point about yourself and your colleagues who are now at Comcast and have had these good careers, I think to be the best data person, you should try and not be a data person, if that makes sense. Yes, that's your superpower, and you've got that skill set, but it's trying to have an approach where you see yourself as a business person first.
Yeah. So so one of the things that I like to dig into is, because there's a lot of generic advice out there on, for example, data people should be connected to the business, right? And every single time that a business hires a data leader or a data leader goes into a data job, they know they should be connected to the business. This isn't advice that they haven't heard before. Yet somehow that situation ends up with a lot of failures, specifically because they weren't connected to the business effectively. So how does it happen that people have heard this advice many times before, both on the company side and on the data leader side, yet still end up in bad situations?
Well, it's a tough one, because that's going to be a case by case basis. But I hear that that issue and that frustration all the time myself. And often what I say to folks is, I say, well, would you ask if you could do the interview again now, are there questions that you'd ask differently in hindsight? And often they say no, because I asked them at an interview, you know, where does data sit, or how is it connected to the business, or is there enough appetite, a sponsorship? I asked them those questions and they said yes. And I say, aha, well, there's the issue, because I think you've got to, as a data leader, one of the things you've got to work out how to find that information out in an interview, but without asking the direct question. Because if you ask the direct question, is there exact level sponsorship here in the business? You're only going to get one answer back, which is yes.
Yeah.
Or how connected I am to the business. Very. So you've kind of got a way, and this is one of the things I speak to data leaders about and coach them on. Is finding ways of finding that information out, or asking that question, but in a more subtle way to try and elicit the information that you need, to help you make a good decision.
That's really interesting and great advice, because I think you're absolutely right. You can ask all the right questions, but if you don't ask them in a way that's going to get you the true, it's like when you're validating a product idea and you go to a customer and say, hey, would you want this? They're always going to say, sure, why not? Until you're like, well, you'd have to pay for it. Then they're like, whoa, hold on. I love it. Okay. So don't ask, is data connected to the business? Ask questions that are gonna
questions around that, but that's not so direct. So,
yeah.
I mean, in that scenario, you could ask a question to whoever's interviewing. Well, tell me how data connects to the business right now. Just a more opaque question. A more general question, which is going to give the person that's sat across from the table. They're going to have to give you an answer rather than just saying yes.
Yeah. I love it. Okay. And so speaking then of sort of the data interview process, and the data job market right now, because on LinkedIn and talking to friends, it seems like a very strange market. On the one hand, there are a lot of companies that are out there trying to hire and can't seem to find the right person. But on the other hand, it seems like jobs aren't filling up as fast and people are spending a lot of time in between things and having a tough time finding their next jobs. Where do you peg the market right now? How do you see it from your vantage point?
I think at the leadership level, it's been very slow in the last 6 to 8 months. For obvious reasons. I mean, I think the economy globally is on a downward track, and FDs are, tightening budgets, and typically the data leader is normally a sort of role, a transformational change role of some kind normally, and those sort of projects aren't getting signed off as much, and if anything, data leaders I think are getting fired, sadly, more than I mean, that's another conversation, but often I think the feeling is within a business, well, that data thing is working okay now, we don't need the leader at this point. So at the leadership level, that's how I'm seeing it. Within I mean, there's so many subsections and sort of strata of the data industry, so it's hard to give anything more than a general answer, but I still think at individual contributor level, there's still a lot happening, particularly on machine learning and the engineering side. I think so. It's interesting though, you say about the insights you've been given on the market. Who have they come from specifically? Have they been? Is that generally, or has that come from a specific section of your colleagues or?
I mean, I talk to a lot of people as both. I mean, just in general for delivery layer work, and I'm talking to a lot of data leaders, and I also have assorted conversations with people that I know, both hiring and looking. So this is more anecdata versus data, but it's enough people that I can see, oh wow, that person's really talented and has been on the market for a while. And also, oh wow, this person's been looking for team members for a long time and hasn't been able to find the right people.
Yeah, I've got a couple of sort of, because I hear that as well. I see that, and I speak to people and hear that as well. And I've got a couple of sort of uh, thoughts on why that is, because it's kind of it's a weird thing, isn't it? It's like, well, there seems to be lots of good people on the market, and but there's companies struggling to hire. What's going on? I think there's two things. I mean, I think generally there's been so much at the leadership level. There's been so many. You see it out there now. There's so many data leadership courses. And there has been for 4 or 5 years, and people getting sort of qualified as data leaders, which is a great thing. But it's what it has. It's sort of flooded the market with generalist data leaders, and I think what people are crying out for is specificity. Often, it might be a bank who needs something really specific around regulation of data, for example. So which is still niche. So even though it appears, or it might be, a marketing firm who needs something really specific around, digital attribution or econometrics or something like that. So even though it appears that there is like a massive talent pool at the leadership level, actually there isn't really, because the niche skills are still pretty niche, and often they're people that are in jobs, so they're hard to pull out. So I think that's why you find companies will put job adverts out for things, and they'll get 300 applications in 2 days, and they'll think, oh great, well easy market, will fill this easily, and then 3 months later they still haven't filled the role, and they can't work out why, because it's like, well, there seems to be a lot of talent out there, but I think it's that specificity thing. So it's a sort of false dichotomy, really. Even though you're getting a lot of job applicants, the real sort of niche specific skills you're looking for probably aren't applying to your job ad, because they're probably in a role and sort of not really active on the market.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if this is just, I mean, LinkedIn shares sometimes some statistics on who's applying to jobs at different levels of seniority. And it's interesting when you see, like, I was looking at a chief data officer job the other day that came across, and they had like 1,500 applicants on it. And it was everybody from like senior, like manager to director to VP to SVP to CD. It was like, who's applying to these jobs? I feel like I feel like because titles can sometimes be so meaningless in the data world, that it's challenging for people to even know on both sides. Like, if this job says CDO, does that mean that they're really looking for a data manager? Or I was a CDO, but this other company would never hire me for more than a data manager because I managed one person in my job as CDO. Like, how does that translate on the recruiting side?
Well, it translates into complexity. I think is I mean, the problem with CDO is, I mean, it's just become a branding tool for the data industry. It's not, in no other business function is, a COO is a COO, a CEO is a CEO, and if you put a COO and a CEO job advert out, you wouldn't get 1,200 applications in a week, because I think with CDO, people realise that it is a bit of a branding tool, so therefore they realise that it might be at manager level rather than exec level, so they still apply. I also think there's an element in the data world as well, because it's still quite an immature space. You find anyone with some sort of data qualifications go, oh, well, I'll have a go at that CDO role because I know a bit about data. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
whereas you wouldn't have that in a CFO or CEO role, because it's a more mature space. So it's because it's just a branding tool. That means that happens, and there's complexity there. So again, the devil's in the detail with it, and I think, going back to our conversation earlier about companies, I think they think, well, we'll put a CDO job title out, and that's fine. We'll get CDOs apply. But what they don't realise is that CDO isn't a qualification, really. It's not a skill set. It's just a sort of branding tool. And actually, what you need to do is forget about the job title. what is it you're trying to achieve in your organization?
Yeah.
Going back to what I was saying, what does success look like? Get really clear on that, and then go out and identify who those people are that can achieve that for you, and whatever they're called, whether they're called CDO or head of data or whatever else. So I think for companies, if anyone's listening to this who's perhaps doesn't know too much but needs to hire a data leader of some kind, forget about the job title. Don't worry too much.
Okay.
You can think about that down the line.
I like that. Just an acceptance that titles don't matter that much is, I think, important. But digging in a little bit more to that question of what success looks like, because, and you talked about it earlier, many companies are at the stage where they know they need to do better with data and they want to do better with data, but it's tough for them to tie in exactly what that looks like because they don't know themselves. And at the same time, they know they need to hire a leader who can even help them define that and get them to a better place. But how do you effectively do that when success for you is vague? Just telling a company, make it less vague. They might not know enough to do that. Like, do you work with them on that? How do you get from that vagueness to that specificity?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a specific product and model that we take companies through to go through that process. That involves consultations. It involves working with our data expert network as well. But so I think the message is for companies who have that vagueness, and that's fine, is I think just be open and kind of I think they need to own where they're at and not try and overplay their hand or oversell. Because there's so many people out there in the data space. One of the things in the data space, people are actually really giving, I think, and there's so many people out there that will speak to you for free, give you insights, so it's just if you're in that situation as companies, it's trying to sort of access those people and have those consultations and just be really open and, go through a process of discovery, to try and say, okay, here's a good goal for the next 12 or 18 months. Here's something that's really achievable. So yeah, it's sort of, I think, and I think they're better off going through that process of discovery. It's a process we call pre-assessment in our business, but it's going through that process before they go to the hiring market. I think the mistake is there's that vagueness, and they think they'll solve that vagueness by going to the hiring market. So they're almost for them, it's almost like the interviews are going to become their sort of consultation, and I think generally that's a mistake for everyone involved. I think it's a massive waste of time for everyone involved. I think companies are better off going through a process of pre-assessment and definition, and then going to the hiring market.
I love that. That's such a great improvement over what I imagine most places do, and what I'm pretty sure most places that I've interviewed at have done.
But sorry to interrupt, but because what happens, and this is actually a really good point, is or something people should be aware of, because what happens if you do it the wrong way round, you're then putting yourself in a situation whereby of the people you're interviewing, whoever is kind of selling to you the best story, you are likely to hire.
Yeah.
And that's a real issue, because you'll end up hiring the best salesperson.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. Not
that a CDO doesn't need to be a good salesperson, but you gotta have a balance.
Okay. Maybe not the best salesperson, but you'll end up whoever is going to tell you the tallest story about what's achievable. Let's say.
Yeah, 100%. It's one of those things where when you say it, it's so obvious, right? For a vague role that you don't really understand what you're going to want. Talking to 10 or 15 current leaders at non-competitive companies who are going to be able to give you advice in an hour call on your situation versus trying to figure it out by yourself, or talking to people that are trying to convince you to hire them. It's just obvious why the other way works better. So I love it. I think that's brilliant. And I'm sure you have more around the package there, but even that core insight is really, really valuable. Back to the candidates, because obviously you don't know like you don't know what you don't know until you've seen enough of the market. So when you look at people either ICs or leaders, what are some of the things that you see data people, they just don't know that they don't know yet about either skills that make them successful or things that hold them back? And what are some of the most impactful things that you've seen from your vantage point?
I I think with the risk of offending some people, I think a lot of people don't understand that their communication is not at a level of the leadership role that they aspire to. And I mean, some of the things that I've seen self-aware people do is really go about improving those communication skills and those business communication skills to the extent of employing executive coaches, employing coaches and communication experts of different kinds. I've even known someone who went and did a theatre course because they'd identified that they weren't performing in town square meetings. You know, in companies, you have a big town square meeting, they call it, where you might have the whole business, 200, 300 people, or larger if you're a larger business, and where you have to speak. And they weren't, their performance wasn't optimal, they felt, in that scenario. So they went out and did a drama course to help them do that, which might sound a bit extreme, but you know, it was absolutely beneficial in this individual's instance. So yeah, that's what I see. As I say, you know, I hope that I think, and to your point, I think a lot of people don't know. They don't know what they don't know, and I think it's that a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that what you said is really interesting. I've personally spent probably tens of thousands of dollars on trainings and courses and other things over my career, probably 2/3 of it my own money, 1/3 of it company money. And I still have ways to go in certain areas, but they call it new levels, new devils, right? Every single time that you get a new job, as you move up the ranks, there are things that you're going to be bad at. And the question is, can you afford to wait around until the level of your incompetence in those areas is solved over time? And will you still have a job at the end of that process? That's the trade-off. And in many cases for myself, the answer was going to be no. And so I recognize that. And I think what you're saying around everybody should be very focused and willing to invest in their own skill development is extremely important for data people. Yeah, communication skills being one of them. I still don't think I'm the best, but I've gotten far better over the years. I used to be absolutely terrible. So, okay.
I find that hard to believe, Solomon, but
no, it's true. It's true. Yeah. It's true. I was not very good. I mean, I still ramble a little bit. That's my weakness. I have a lot of thoughts in my head and they just kind of zoop out of my mouth.
You and me both, and I think that's part of it. And I think it's probably important to define communication, because I think when you talk about communication, people instantly think, well, you know, can you hold a conversation down the pub or down the bar, you know, and are you engaging? And it's not that per se. What it is it's the ability to be very succinct and concise when you're making a point.
Yep.
So it's impactful. And you'll find that people ask all the time, well, what makes a great data leader? And a great data leader is a great leader. And you'll find whenever and I'm sure we've both worked for these kind of people. Whenever you're listening to a great leader, they are unbelievably concise and succinct and impactful in the way they make a point. So that afterwards, 2 hours later, you'll think about that and you'll kind of remember it. And that's a great skill to have, and it's not easy, and you can improve it over time.
100%. It used to take me 20 sentences to say what I needed. Now I can get by in 3, but the best people do it in 1. I still, and going from 3 to 1 is a big skill jump. Obviously you do a lot of work in the data space, and you probably have a very specific way that you like to work with companies. Talk a little bit about, if someone has listened to this and really likes what you have to say, how do you work with companies, and how should people reach out to you?
Well, they can reach out to us either to me through LinkedIn, Jeremy Wyatt, or through our website, which is www.wyatt.partners. We typically work with companies. We've got 3 different products that we work with companies. Universe First is our exec search methodology. So that's typically for companies who are looking to hire a data leader of some kind, senior strategic, mission critical hires. Our Venture First model is designed for companies who might have 5, 10, 15 individual contributor hires, so hiring a team over a certain period of time. And then our final model, Data Kickstart, which is the process I referred to slightly earlier in our interview, which is a process where we take companies from A to B in terms of defining clarity around what they want to achieve with data and what a data leader should look like to help them achieve that.
Cool. That's great. And for non business owners or people that are not building data teams, but who are data leaders themselves, or who are data people themselves interested in following along, is LinkedIn the best place to follow you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's a good place to follow us, which, just find me on LinkedIn and connect with me. Or if you want to visit our website, which is www.wyatt.partners, there's a tab on our website where you can join our data leadership network, which we put out monthly newsletters and other industry insights and collateral. So that's a great way of staying in touch as well. So yeah, either LinkedIn or join our data leadership network on the website.
All right, great. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much. This has been extremely insightful, and I have been a huge fan of your LinkedIn content. So this is a personal recommendation for everybody listening. Go follow Jeremy on LinkedIn. He's got a lot of really smart things to say, and you'll be a better data person for listening. And thank you so much for tuning in to the Delivery Layer podcast, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Have a great day.